Hello everyone! I'm sorry this video is late. I had a big event at the end of July I needed to prep for and I lost track of time. If you attended Megacon Manchester at the end of July, then you'll have already had a sneaky peek at this little lady's final look. So, let's get started. For her dress, I started by cutting out the pieces for the bodice, first stopping the edges with some glue before sewing them all together. Taking some thin satin ribbon and some thread, I created little ruffles which I then sewed to the bodice at the seams. After doing the first two on the front of the bodice, I tested it on the doll to see what it looked like, and I hated how it was looking. They just didn't flow as smoothly as they did in my initial design, so I carefully removed them and tested the base bodice, and I liked it so much more this way. Taking 2 strips of organza, I ran a running stitch along the top edge to create a gathered edge. Using some ribbon, I attached the gathered strips to the bodice to form sleeves. With the sleeves and ribbon attached, I took some small pearl beads and sewed them all along the ribbon to form the top hem. Taking some more ribbon, I used it to hem the bottom of the bodice. For the skirt section of the dress, I started by cutting 3 layers, one in black taffeta, one in white cotton, and the final one in the same organza as the sleeves. Taking the cotton layer, I slipped some paper underneath before taking a sponge and black acrylic paint to create a transition from white to black, trying to create an oozing look as I did so. Once I was done, I set it aside to dry. Taking the black layer, I cut a long strip from the same material and gathered it all the way along the bottom edge of the black layer, sewing it down in place. Taking the white transition layer and some light grey satin fabric, I gathered the satin, placing a pearly bead between each gather while sewing it down onto the cotton layer. Taking all 3 layers of the skirt, I attached them to the bodice. Taking some black seed beads and black drop beads, I sewed them to the black ruffle on the bottom layer of the skirt, creating a dripping effect all the way around. Taking this pair of Monster High shoes I had in my stock box and my craft knife, I carefully removed the outer shell so that I was left with just the soles, which I then painted black to match the wedges. Once the paint is dry, I took some narrow black satin ribbon and used it to create the straps of her shoes before gluing them to the soles to finish them off. The parasol itself gave me so much trouble. I tried 4 different ways and none of them worked how I planned, so I decided to heck with it and just glued the material straight onto the frame I was using. Taking a sponge, water and black acrylic paint once more, I created a fade of black from the bottom of the parasol, similar to the second layer of the skirt on her dress. To start, I drew around a cardboard cylinder from a ball of yarn I'd used up, extending it out a little before then hot gluing the cylinder to the centre of the base. Taking a smaller cardboard cylinder and some yarn fluff from brushing out wet, I put the fluff in the bottom of the larger cylinder to cushion the smaller one and keep it elevated, testing the height by sitting the doll base on top, adjusting it with fluff for padding until I got the height right. Taking some more cardboard, I carefully measured, cut and shaped so that it would fit around the larger cylinder, gluing it in place with hot glue. With the backrest in place, I began to tear and reshape the overall shape of it, giving it a slightly roughed up look, curling over the edges in the process. Testing the final placement and level the smaller cylinder with the dull base once more before gluing it to the back piece. Using tinfoil, I filled in the gap between the two cylinders. Taking some more foil, I used it to flesh out the shape I was trying to create, starting with the tree roots, before moving on to smooth the transition between the base and the cardboard to form the rest of the tree stump. Using a little more cardboard, I cut a small circle to fit on top of the small cylinder, adjusting it to fit before gluing it down with more hot glue. Once I'm happy with the base frame, it was time to bring out the clay. This time using air dry foam clay. It was my first time using foam clay and I had a lot of fun with it. Starting by filling in the inner section of the stump first, smoothing it out and bridging the gaps using a little water to help smooth things out. kept adding more and more clay, using it to cover the whole base and bring the whole broken tree stump look together. Once I'm happy with the overall shape, I took my sculpting tools to add some details, deepening where the bark was coming away from the stump, adding some more clay to flesh out the roots, as well as using the tools to define them further, adding some details to the bark itself, and letting it dry once I was satisfied with it. Once it's dried, it's time to paint, starting with a base coat in a brown tone to cover the bark sections. Switching to a lighter tone for the inner section of the bark. Once I'd finished, I decided it was too dark, so I mixed up a lighter shade and went back over it. Lightening the brown shade further, I coated the inner section of the stump. Finally, painting the spaces between the roots with green to be grassy sections. Once the base coats are dry, I went back in, building up the colour and opacity. Going over the bark, I took a fresh sponge and used it to apply some mossy patches to the trunk. Going in with a darker brown on the inner stump to add the aid rings. Touching it up with a few more mossy patches. For the face up, I started by applying blushing to her cheeks. Going back over it with a slightly pinker tone as I decided the original was too peachy. Then added a little blushing to her nose and forehead. Taking a dark grey pastel, I added a little to her lips and some to her lid to create her eyeshadow. Switching to black to get a darker coverage of her lips and eyelids. Once happy with the pastels, I took out a brown pencil and started drawing in her lash line. Switching to a grey shade to fill in her eyebrows, doing my best to keep them even. Moving back to her eyes, I took a neutral peach colour and drew in her waterline and corneas. Returning to the grey pencil, I began to fill in her irises and white for the whites of her eyes. Taking a darker grey pencil, I worked on deepening the irises and brightening her eye whites. Taking a black pencil, I went over the brown pencil to create her angular eyeliner. For going in and adding a little more detail to her lips. Taking a darker grey, I added more detail and defined her eyebrows. I then went back over with the pencils to add more colour. And this is where I started having trouble with the ceiling. The colour wasn't for building for her pupils. Well, it was building on one side but chipping on the other side. So I worked on building up other areas like her lips and her irises. Carefully using the pencils to build up her eyeshadow. Using whites for her eye white and adding a little highlighter to her cupid's bow. And this is where I gave up trying to work with the pencils for her eyes, as the sealant kept chipping on one eye and refusing to build opacity, so I switched to acrylic paints. Starting with the irises, I carefully worked on filling them in, using the pencil underneath as a guideline. Building in the darker tones to give them some definition. Finally, adding her pupils, using a dark grey to accent the outline of her irises and white for the whites of her eyes. Returning to black to fill in her eyeliner. Adding a little more detail to her irises. Before adding white for the eye shines. Applying gloss to eyes and lips. no idea what happened to the rest of the footage for her hair, but I started by taking white yarn wefts. I filled in her parting before filling in the rest of her head, following the original hairline, giving her a little trim in places, and used some water to help with the styling to create some rounded sections to mimic a dripping look. Are you ready? I'd like to introduce you to Mycena. I'm really happy with her overall look and how much I was able to incorporate the ink cap mushroom, which is what I used for her main inspiration. Even though her parasol gave me so much trouble, I'm glad I pushed through it, as it helped me pull the whole look together. It was really nice to work with such a monochrome palette too, as it's not something I've done before, and I'm really glad I did. I was also pleasantly surprised by how light her stand was, since I'm used to clay being really heavy once it's cured. So which part of Mycena's story did you enjoy the most? I think her face up and the beadwork were my favourites, despite the whole sealant issue. And Mycena definitely scratched the itch to create another mushroom inspired doll. How long until it hits again, I wonder? There are plenty of different mushrooms out there to work with after all. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until next time!